I have no apologies have been received. This meeting has been convened for the purpose of resuming consideration by this committee of the Local Government Bill 2018. Before we resume consideration of the bill, I propose to deal with just some housekeeping matters. In order to ensure the smooth running of the meeting, any member acting in substitution for a member of the committee should formally notify the clerk now if they have not already done so. And item 2, members should be aware that due to today's scheduled resumed consideration of the Local Government Bill is due to conclude by 1:40, as we have to give the room back. If we have not concluded consideration at this time, we will adjourn to a later session, and we do know that 5 o'clock is available should we require it. I would like to welcome Mr John Paul Phelan, TD Minister of State at the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government, with special responsibility for local government and electoral reform, and his officials to the meeting this morning. Before we begin, I would ask members to please ensure their mobile phones are switched off or in airplane mode for the duration of their meeting, because they will interfere with the broadcasting equipment even when on silent mode. Last night, when we had to suspend, you were midway, Eamon, so I'm going to allow you to go in first this morning.
My understanding is we're on Amendment 40, is that correct?
You're on 111, which is 111 to 114 inclusive.
Oh, sorry, 111, yeah, 1112, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It's included in that, that's fine, yeah, sorry, my mistake.
114.
So many, yeah, that's
okay.
Two seconds. Now, I was just beginning to talk about this new construct of the committee and the issue of, for example, the bigger part of Roscommon being in Westmeath rather than in Roscommon and so on, and Waterford and Kenny was mentioned. But there's another very serious development here that, if it were to take hold, would have huge ramifications for democracy in our country. And I notice in recent years quite a move towards corporatism. Now, corporatism was a European idea of the 30s that thankfully we eschewed at that time, and we stuck with democracy. The idea of corporatism is you get representative groups to form the ruling structures, rather than what we do is allowing every person to have one person, one vote. And whether they're well educated or not well educated, there's no test once you get to the required age. Now, this seems to be an interesting toe in the water. And I suspect that that's all it is, a toe in the water to a much wider thought process that's taking place. So basically, this new committee will have a mixture of elected people on it, and we needn't go into that because I think that'll be covered by other members. But it'll have nominees nominated by the Caherly, but we don't know what constraints will be put on them. We have no idea. Now, what's interesting is that it's one of these selective processes where certain qualifications really get you in, put you in the in-group in society to get on this committee, rather than just a committee made up of your peers, selected by your peers, by the electorate. So it talks about people who have experience of provision of transport, provision of housing, the development of infrastructure, or business and trade. Now, I do note that they don't have a vote. Of course, that could change later on. But they will be in there with huge influence, and that's why they've been put in there. They wouldn't be put in there if they weren't going to have huge influence. As I say, I see this kind of process being widened out into the general local authority scene on a progressive basis, because that's how the system works. It has an idea, it's a big idea, it knows if it goes forward, it'll hit a wall, so they creep. So you don't give them votes in the first thing, and you just do it in these situations. But you are giving them one of the most significant powers, that's the power over planning. Now, the other thing is, the groups, in my view, aren't representative. Even if you were going down this route, and I don't like the route that's been gone down, because I see nobody here from the rapid areas. So the people who in the main will be upper middle class, living in salubrious surroundings, will be given the planning power over the people who have to live in less salubrious surroundings in these towns, and many of these towns have rapid areas. So I've seen nobody who have to live in the housing estates and who will bring that huge expertise to it of what it's like to be at the bottom of the pile and have to have all these great planning ideas imposed on you without much choice about where you live or what circumstance you live. And we know that in the urban areas we have by far the biggest social problems in the country because of social segregation. But of course the people who will be nominated on this will come from a certain class and won't have suffered the effects of social segregation that leaves us with the most deprived communities exclusively in urban areas. The biggest drug issues exclusively in poor urban areas. So I would suggest that you'd have to look at that again and say, if we really want good planning, let's make sure that they're represented. Now, of course, the way they were always represented is they tend to be numerous in numbers and they would get represented in a normal democratic way, but you're putting these super influencers in here to take that power away. The other sector that's totally ignored in this, if you're going down this corporate road, which as I said, I fundamentally disagree with, but if you're going down there, are the community and voluntary sector. A huge sector in terms of well-being in Irish society. And let's be honest about it, of all of us who live in communities, if you took the community and voluntary sector out of our communities, they would be destroyed. A lot of what's good and positive, wholesome, that gives huge satisfaction to people, doesn't come into these kind of this total, it's all about the economy stupid. That was a trite, stupid statement. It's not all about the economy, it's about the quality of life. And we've nobody here from the community and voluntary sector. So I have to say, just on these amendments, whereas they don't directly relate to Galway at the moment, they certainly, in my view, are a precursor of a new approach to local authorities. It's the first toe in the water of a new approach that says quite bluntly to us, we can't trust people elected by the people. We need to get the elites in control. And that this is the first stab at it, and if we get away with this, we keep coming and we keep coming. As I said, this mainly derives from European thinking of the 30s, but of course we all know what happened in Europe in the 30s, and thankfully we left it in this country as an ordinary plain democracy, by the people, for the people, of the people, and we avoided a lot of the conflicts that the other approach led to.
Thanks, Eamon. Minister, all the other questions were asked last night. Eamon, apart from Fergus, had a couple of questions. Now, I know he's running 3 minutes late, so I might get you to start with the answers, and if Fergus comes in, if the committee are amenable, we'll let him ask his questions then when he comes in. Is that okay? Yes. Thanks.
I'll try to answer, as many of the issues. A lot of them were expressed by numerous of the speakers, and I'll go through them as much as I can. Deputy Casey and others expressed regret that these amendments are late in the day. I'm not, again, exercising a criticism of the committee, but all of this flows from a report adopted by government 6 months ago, which was sent to the committee. And again, I've always said that there should be 2 committees in this area, which is on, principally in that case, the 4 areas that boundary reviews were conducted into. And there was an acceptance, and even to take myself, and it's difficult to do that out of the picture, but that issues around towns and cities that cross county boundaries are intractable by their nature. And it goes to the real heart of Irish identity. That identity with place, with parish, with community, with county. And it was felt, and even before I arrived in the position that I'm in, that we had to look at some sort of new structure that would allow counties to remain, the borders to remain as they are, but allow for the proper planning and development of towns and cities that spill into there's only examples, I think, of 2 local authorities. I can't think off the top of my head if there are examples of ones that spill into 3 local authorities. But hence the list. The list comes directly from the amendments, because this deals solely with towns of 1,500 to 100,000. I agree. I think it was Deputy O'Brien said it last night that, you know, things that work well in one mightn't work well in the other. I think that's a fair point. But like the premise of where we're coming from with all of this is to have a full development plan for these towns. As at present, both local authorities do their own thing. And to give the good example, and I don't know, was it Deputy O'Brien or someone asked for examples, plus Deputy O'Brien again last night, good cooperation since the 50s between Carlow Town and Laois. Lots of shared services. End of the year, there's a cheque exchanged. Carlow delivering services for thousands of people at this stage that live in County Laois. And it was actually in one of the boundary reports. Interestingly enough, about that boundary report, there was only 7 submissions from the general public, and Deputy Murphy will know about the 20-something in Roscommon, 20-something thousand in Roscommon, and the 20,000 approximately in my own neck of the woods. 7 people in Laois and Carlow submitted, because the cooperation has worked. Now, it's non-statutory, and it's also, they still do independently their own local area plans. So what we're looking at here is providing functions that are not either delivered fully or delivered at all by the existing local government structure. And the most key one of those is the inability of the current system to do a full plan for the town or the city in question. So this goes, every, I think, speaker raised this issue. Senator or Deputy O'Dowd gave the real example of why this measure, or something equivalent to it, and I want to emphasise now at the start that I'm fully open. It'll be at least 2 weeks before we have a report stage of this. And I will sit down with the spokespeople and whoever else wants to attend from the different groups and the independents here. And I will put in my own ministerial amendments to accommodate them. There is nothing underhand. Every public speech that I have given to local authority members, to the Management Association, in the Chamber, both on this bill and on Town Council, private members' bills that there have been a few of, all have spelled out that the future for cross-boundary towns and cities is a joint structure that deals with forward planning. And that is what this aims to achieve. So next week, on Tuesday, my private secretary after today will email all the members of the Joint Committee, and you can bring other colleagues if you wish. Sit down with me and the officials, identify the areas on wording or on senior, or the hierarchy, I think was what you were getting at, Deputy O'Brien, yesterday. And I'm acutely aware that I attacked on all sides on Deputy Cullinan's local radio this morning that this was my revenge on Waterford. Nothing could be further from the truth. No, and you weren't. No, you weren't. But lots of my own. But I'll deal with that. But like, it is a well-flagged and genuine attempt to do something new on the intractable boundary question. And just to give the final bit of explanation as to how we arrived at this, essentially what we're asking is the smaller local authority to give up its power of producing a local area plan. And in the case of Drogheda, that Deputy O'Dowd mentioned, that means that Meath County Council will select 3 members, along with Louth County Council. They will adopt the local area plan for the urban area, most of which is in County Louth. And that the county development plan then will have to not do what they did in Drogheda, resile from the joint agreement. So we can avoid the scenarios that were discussed. I think it was Deputy O'Brien again or someone else that raised the question that emerged in Cork over the years, where the County Council was zoning land for housing just on the boundary and creating new settlements immediately on what was the old county-city boundary. And I'm open to changing these amendments in whatever way we can to accommodate the concerns of members of the committee, and we'll have multiple meetings next week and in the 2 weeks in the lead up to report stage. A couple of other specific issues that were raised, just to talk about what Debbie O'Keefe says. I'm not particularly wedded to the idea of the outside people. There's absolutely nothing, and I want to emphasise this to you and everyone here. We were looking, the role of these groups is to perform the functions that are not really adequately performed or not performed at all by the councils already. So there was no question of getting the planning staff of the councils, our planners, put on as the experts. But we were looking at the provision of the forward planning aspect. And I have no difficulty at report stage accepting an amendment, and I completely accept your idea in relation to the rapid areas, in relation to people who've lived in some badly planned areas and community and voluntary sector in general. I think that's, Chair, dealing with most of the questions that people have on these.
Yeah, Owen.
It doesn't deal with most of my questions, so let me, I suppose, go through them again. And look, let me say at the outset, I absolutely accept the intention behind the bill to solve a particularly difficult problem. So there's no dispute about that. I also accept that you have flagged the general principle. But I do think you're underestimating the concern of the committee members in that we're given 2 days to consider the detail of your actual proposals. There's a big difference between giving us a general indication of the policy direction and flagging it to having adequate time to scrutinise the details of proposals. And it's not that we want lots and lots of time. This committee is incredibly flexible with all of your other ministerial colleagues in terms of providing time to do it. But the length of time we're being given to scrutinise this is genuinely very tough for us. One of my questions is, I'm still not clear why it is that we're being given so little time. So, for example, when we look at the earlier amendments in relation to the plebiscites, there's a very clear rationale as to why you needed them through in this bill, because we have a deadline to meet in terms of the registers, etc. So I suppose the first question is, I would like to be convinced as to why this has to come in as an amendment now rather than as a standalone bill or in the detail of your local government bill 2019. That's the first thing. I still haven't heard an adequate explanation in terms of the ratio of elected reps to voters. Right now, I'm not making an argument here that there should be exact proportionality. Okay, because if you had exact proportionality, then the smaller area of an adjoining local authority would fear that they would be swamped by the larger area. So I accept that this works in both ways. What I just don't understand is why it's a simple, rigid formula of 3 and 3 elected members and the chairpersons or mayors, as opposed to some other options, because there are going to be variations in size here. I don't know the demographics of each of the areas that you've listed. But it just seems to me that there should be some way of thinking that through that avoids the problem that you identified to me informally yesterday after the meeting, which is, well, if you give too much weight to one, that means you never get anything agreed. So I'm yet to be convinced on that. That's the first thing. The second issue I raised yesterday is the process of the appointment of elected members. So, for example, if I was the majority party in the 2 councils, is it just that we have the majority and we can elect the 6 members on either side? Where does that leave the smaller parties or the diversity of elected representation? Likewise, the geographical location of those elected representatives. I haven't heard you address how we deal with that. I also haven't heard you answer the question around staff. So if I'm reading the bill right, the committee will decide what staff it requires from the existing local authorities. Does that have to be approved by the chief executives of those local authorities? Can the chief executives object? What happens, for example, if the staff that the committee request are already busy doing something else? We know there's still pressures across all council departments. How will those functions be replaced within the existing staff complements? The next issue then is the budget. So whatever this committee decides will have a financial implication. And that will have a financial implication that will have to be borne out by the 2 local authorities. So again, how is that going to work, and what happens if there's very significant disagreements, for example, over budgets or indeed over zonings or other things? And again, I'm not saying that we go back to the Drogheda example where you just allow the local authorities to block everything. I'm just saying the option you've put on the table isn't the only and isn't necessarily a very clear option. A number of deputies yesterday asked a very reasonable question, which is, with county development plans, with local area plans, there's a statutory consultative process. The local authorities know the steps they have to go through. It's not clear from this what that consultative process is, or certainly it's not clear to me in terms of engagement with the wider elected members of the councils, or indeed with the public. And at this stage, and I go back to what I said at the start, Minister, it's not that any of us are trying to be difficult, right? And it's not that any of us are trying to block you resolving a solution. But in the absence of having adequate time to go through all of these things and be convinced that what you're proposing is the right way to fix this, many of us will be left in a position of not being able to support this today. And I understand your offer of, let's sit down next week and then come back with amendments the week after. That's still a very tight time frame for something that's relatively complex. I appreciate you and your officials have been working on it for quite some time. But for those of us who are only taking this up now in any detail, I'm not so sure a week or 2 weeks, when we have a bunch of other very significant things on our schedule. And I would ask you, I suppose, to consider and give me your view and your response. Would it not make more sense for you to withdraw the amendment at this stage? We'll take up the offer of engaging with you both immediately before and after Christmas and insert this into the 2019 local government bill. I mean, would that not make more sense than trying to shoehorn it into the 2018 bill in a very short time frame?
Thanks, Eoin. Pat?
Thanks, Chair. And first of all, can I say that the majority of people here are not against this concept. I think we all are in favour of this concept. And we have worked as a positive nature in this committee through all the legislation that's gone through here. But in fairness, this has landed on Tuesday night to us. And this is the first time we're actually seeing the detail that we're being asked to agree. And it goes back to the planning amendment bill last year, where the government introduced 71 amendments at report stage. We have to be given time. This is a very positive move, but it needs to be critically looked at, and we haven't had that opportunity to do that, in fairness to us. So I have just a few key issues. In relation to the urban area plan, where does it sit in the planning hierarchy? It's not the National Development Plan, it's not a regional plan, it's not a county plan, it's not an environment plan, it's not a local area plan. Does it sit, is it part of the county development plan, or does it sit outside the county development plan, a plan that stands in its own right, like some of the environment plan around the country that go through the very same process as the county development plan? And does the whole consultation around all of that have to follow the very same procedures as those plans? Because I can't see that here the way I'm reading this at the moment. And the other area I did have concern about was in relation to the land grabbing, whether that had, no, don't, sorry, I won't call it use grabbing, the boundary being decided by this, is that doesn't say anything about any public consultation in relation to the initial boundary, which is 11240 on that. And I'm going back to what I raised again last night, and the more I think about this, the more I'm becoming stronger on it. And you said we don't have the expertise, and that's why we're considering bringing in the outside sector. How do we not have the expertise for our local area plans, our county plans, our regional plans? The expertise at local authority level is there for all those plans, so they're there for these plans. So I think this should remain within control of the public reps, and we need to put the trust back into the public reps around this. And the more I think about it, you're saying one thing here, but yet we're adopting so many other plans without that cohort of people in it. And they're higher plans and greater plans. So I just don't see the logic behind it. And Darragh found out last night that Bray is part of this, one of the areas. And in fairness to Bray, I'm not too sure whether the local authority is even aware that this is coming down the track. Because since the establishment of the municipal district, they spent the whole time creating a municipal district plan, so as that we encompass the whole of the municipal district area, I suppose, from Bray, and then another plan around that. And now we're being told, you're going to have another plan that's now going to incorporate part of Dún Laoghaire. And I think, in fairness to the population and the landmass in Bray and Dún Laoghaire, I think Bray will have 75% of it, and Dunleary will have maybe 25%. I don't know. And then we get into the whole area of proportionality. Can the smaller side control? Do you know what I mean? So there's all these issues, and I want to support this. I think it is a solution moving forward, but I think we're rushing it, and I think there will be mistakes made if we try and ram this through in the next 2 weeks. That's just my opinion.
Thanks, Pat. David, I know you indicated early, but I always take the members in first and then non-members after that in that order. So, Darragh, you're next.
Yeah, I'd be interested, maybe if it's okay, Chair, for the Minister to respond to a couple of those, because some of my questions were the same questions as my colleagues have put, and then I might come in then, if that's okay with the Minister.
I know I don't want to upset your procedures, but I have to go back into the Public Accounts Committee. So if it was possible, I can put the question.
You're next. If Darragh doesn't want to
I'll
come in
give
there,
way
you're
then in
next.
this instance, yeah.
Thanks for that, Darragh. I appreciate that. And thanks to the Chair for your indulgence. And listen, I just want to start, Minister, by saying that we all, I suppose, will look at this through the lens of what's closest to us. And I don't intend to get caught up in the hyperbole of this issue in terms of the commentary that will flow from this locally, because obviously it is an issue that would be contentious in Waterford and Kilkenny. That this boundary issue has been contentious for some time. I haven't been one of those politicians that's increased the temperature on this issue, and I do accept that we do need to have some sort of structure and some process and framework in place that focuses on the needs of the people who live there and not on all the other issues that seem to gravitate around this issue, which are sometimes somewhat unhelpful. So I have no difficulty in principle to a solution being found. The difficulty is that this solution that's been brought to the table is very late in the day in a bill that was designed to do something else. And notwithstanding the fact that you did signpost and flag up in general terms, as Deputy O'Brien and others have said, that you are minded to look at some sort of solution and some sort of mechanism such as this, the detail of it is now before us, and the detail of it concerns us. And I have spoken to councillors in Waterford and also to the management in Waterford, and they're concerned about the process. And here's why they're concerned, Minister. They have no problem with good planning, sustainable development, but they do have concerns in relation to the democracy element of all of this. So I just want you to help me understand how this will work in practice. And we have the example of Waterford Kilkenny. My understanding is that this urban district committee, that's what it's called, would involve the metropolitan area of Waterford City, and then that part of South Kilkenny that was subject to a potential boundary extension. So that's about 45,000 who live in the metropolitan part of Waterford City, and about 7,000 that live in that part of South Kilkenny, which is 53,000. So the vast majority are living in Waterford, obviously. And yet you have 3 elected reps from Kilkenny and 3 elected reps from Waterford. Now, you can obviously see how problematic that's going to be from a democratic point of view for people who live in Waterford, and they will be very concerned in relation to that. And that's just the composition of it. That's not even to look at the outside people who will come in, that has been raised by Chuck Casey. It's then the powers and the functions that they have, or this committee will have, that will concern members even more, and what relationship that committee will have with the 2 councils, and more particularly for me, the relationship with Waterford City and County Council. So my understanding of the amendments is that they will have powers to formulate their own local area plan. But will that local area plan be able to supersede area plans which have already been crafted by the local authorities? And if that's the case, that creates another set of democratic problems, in the sense that you have 32 councillors in Waterford who formulate a plan, and that plan can be superseded by a smaller number that are not elected to that body as such and are appointed we don't know how. And I think that is that's going to be problematic. The same then with development plans. Can they vary development plans? And how does that work in practice? And these are the type of practical things that need to be worked out. Even simple things like, let's say they decide in their local area plan they want to build a road somewhere, and it will be in the entire geographical area, which would include the entire area of Waterford City plus then this smaller area. Let's just say this committee of 6 decides somewhere we're going to build a road, or decides that should happen. There's budgetary implications. The budget is decided by the councils. So how is that going to work? So I think practically people are struggling to understand how it's going to work, Minister, and it hasn't gone down well, you're right, in Waterford for all those reasons. I don't think people are opposed to a solution, but they don't like this solution. So I would just repeat what Dr. Eoin Ó Broin has said. I think, Minister, it would be better if you were to withdraw these amendments, because I know from talking to management in Waterford City Council, they haven't been consulted. They haven't been. They certainly were aware that some sort of proposition was being put on the table. But see, in terms of the detail, they haven't been consulted. And how can we force something upon local authorities where the management are saying we don't see how this will work? They weren't consulted. The councillors weren't consulted. You said there's members of your own party in one constituency that are obviously concerned about this as well, notwithstanding whatever language that they may have used or if emotions were running high on it, but they're concerned. And they should be consulted with. So it's best, I think, at this point that these amendments, and it's my strong advice to you, is to withdraw them and either bring them back in the 2019 bill that Dr. Ó Broin talked about, or a separate standalone bill. And let us examine this passionately and in the appropriate way, without jumping to conclusions, you know, giving it proper consideration, but looking at practically how it will work. I'm certainly up for that. I want something that will work. I don't believe that this process that you envisage will work for Waterford and Kilkenny, whatever about the other areas. The one size fits all is not going to work here, Minister. So they're my concerns, and unfortunately I have to go back into the PEC. I might be here for your response, but Dr. Ó Broin, I'm sure, will update me on that. Thank you for your indulgence as well, Cahill.
Eugene, you're the last person in this round. And then I'll come back to you once he comes back. Yeah. Your first in once he replies.
Yeah.
Okay, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to take up much time. I just want clarification, and I unfortunately have to go away. You know, obviously this bill will take in the Monksland area, which, as you know, Minister, was so controversial, and I have put down questions to you, and we will have an opportunity to discuss that at a later stage, I presume. That's basically all I wanted to state.
Thank you. Minister.
I'll try and be as quick as I can, Chair, but there's been a lot of fairly specific questions. So I took all the notes last night, and it was only when Deputy O'Brien was going through them that I used the highlighter to highlight his issues. In relation to the time issue, the intention of this all along has been and still remains that when the new councils are elected, that these structures will come into place. And notwithstanding the fact that we're going to have a local government bill next year, which will be primarily the Galway bill, that will not come into effect with the best will in the world until well after the next local elections. I do want to say, in response to all of the queries by members, in asking you not to vote down these amendments, I give a commitment that if we can't come up with something constructive in the 2 weeks before report stage, then I will withdraw the whole lot of it. Because this is a substantive, I agree it's substantive, and for me, who's been buried in it all of my life, I suppose I have a unique kind of appreciation of it, and I don't want to be seen to be doing anything that disadvantages anyone. But I would say that hopefully we can figure out some amendments within that 2 week period, and I'm willing to that there be my amendments. But if that's not agreeable, then I'll withdraw the section. But I do think that I haven't heard anyone who has disagreed with the idea. The principal objections are in relation to the composition. And the problem with the composition is if you're telling the smaller local authority that you're losing your power to do your local area plan, then the fear factor kicks in that the larger local authority which could dominate on a proportionality basis these committees will just dictate, and will it'll be a boundary change by the back door. That's the fear. So I mean there isn't any, and I'm not going to be dishonest to the members here, there isn't any attempt to suggest that it's proportional, but it is a very genuine attempt to deal with a completely intractable issue, which we all know that there will never be county boundaries changed for the foreseeable future of the Oireachtas than any of us could tell. So how then do we deal in the structures that we have and try and create something new that would look at the whole of these towns and cities? So that's where I'm coming from on it. In relation to the membership, they will be selected from the local authority electoral area adjacent to the city. So in other words, to use the Drogheda example, the Drogheda urban local electoral area of the Drogheda municipal district, plus is it Laytown, Bettystown or Judy? They will come from those 2 local electoral areas.
But that's
and they will come proportionately from those 2 electoral areas. I mean, it won't be up to the ruling groups and the council as a whole, but it will be the local councillors that are elected in those areas. Because like, if these committees are to mean anything, we can't have members from 40 miles away who are not representing the areas, you know, on them. And equally, what we're proposing in terms, and no problem accepting the amendments that were alluded to by Deputy O'Keefe and others about extending this, you know, the backgrounds by which some of these outside people might come from. What is proposed is that the 2 Cathaoirleach, along with the chair of the group, would be the people who would be choosing, was my understanding of the legislation, would be the people who are choosing the outside people, whether it's 2 or 4, and the backgrounds that they come from, I'm certainly well open. And I hear what members are saying, and Deputy Casey said it strongly. This isn't, it might seem, and when you say your comments in the cold light of day, that I'm trying to take powers off councillors. There has been support at local authority, representative group level, not for the idea that in certain limited circumstances that you know, there could be a situation where somebody from business, somebody who, to use the Waterford example, is a representative of the traders in the middle of the town, business and traders mentioned. There's been massive planning issues through the generations in all of these towns, which have seen out-of-town centres built and centres of towns destroyed. I mean, that's what it's in there for. But again, when we come to considering the report stage stuff, if people want that to be worded differently, I specifically requested that these people wouldn't have votes. Because that's what elected people are there to do. But if it can, I think there's a value in having some people from, whether it's from the community background or from the kind of utility background, in the room. But maybe they shouldn't be full members. Maybe they should be ex officio type, you know, or you know, the elected member should be the paramount person, and I have no issue with that. In relation to the other stuff that was raised, Deputy Cullinan, yeah, the hierarchy. Essentially what's being proposed is that these groups will draw up their local area plan. So we're not throwing out the local area plan that's already done in Bray. The next one will be one that includes all of Bray, including the bit that's in Dublin.
And will it include the bits that's in the rural area now that don't form part of the town? Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
So
I'm going to answer that. I want to answer that because, and I can't remember which one of the amendment deals with. It speaks about the contiguous areas beside the town. So it will be a matter for the group themselves to decide whether it should include the rural area. We're giving that freedom to them to make that choice themselves. And there may be, again, the one-size-fits-all wouldn't work. So it might apply in Bray and it might apply in Waterford, or vice versa with the other areas. We're not prescriptive. I also want to say that the existing statutory provisions for the drawing up of local area plans are absolutely being retained. So all of the consultation questions that were asked, all of the engagement with the public, we're not changing a word of it. That all has to be done the same thing. And I really don't accept the argument about staff. The staff in the local authorities are doing these local area plans anyway. What we're talking about here is effectively they're almost seconded. These are not going to be bodies corporate in themselves. They will not have separate budgets. So therefore, the staff that are doing these local area plans in both local authorities will do it together for the whole town. That's the thinking, at least. And therefore, there won't be that cost. That cost is being borne by the local authorities anyway. We just want the local area plans, rather than having two, to have one that makes sense together. And equally, the budget implications that were mentioned by Deputy Cullinan in terms of applying for funding, which that's exactly the case already. You know, if a road is proposed in one of these areas that crosses the boundary from Meath into Louth, you know, there's a number of mechanisms both authorities can apply separately. There can be a lead authority if they agree that this is a measure they want to do, and those measures will still remain in place. So I think I just want to check that I've tried to answer everything. Yeah.
Can I come back to you, Minister, because we just have a couple more people, if that's okay, Darragh?
Yeah, thanks, Geraldine. Just a couple of things on this. To follow on from what Deputy Casey has said, I think all of us would agree, and there's genuine concerns here, is that, like, formalising synergy, shared interest, works programmes, goals between areas that cross county boundaries make absolute sense, okay? And I can argue about the composition, and I will do, and the sequencing. I think we need to get the sequencing right. I think there's a lot of additional work, Minister. We've covered all the points, and I covered a lot of them there last night. I think this also needs a review period. If we're to do it, I think that it needs to be formally built into it. If you're rolling it out to 8 areas, I think if it works, there's more that I would go to. I mentioned a couple to you just off the top, yesterday evening. You know, I would the concerns I have in relation to the timing. I take your point that the report was agreed by government and laid to the committee, but you know, I want to be reasonable and my party wants to be reasonable in how we approach this. And I think I could agree that we go to the next stage, but I would reserve the right as spokesperson for my party. If I'm not happy, I will table amendments that report to withdraw the sections in their entirety. And the only reason I'm doing that is because the concept of it is something I absolutely agree with, and I've seen the issues in local authorities across the country and indeed in my own, and I think we need that level of formalisation. We would have worked with you, through the process if I'd known. It wasn't on my radar. I don't think it was on any of my colleagues' radar that this was coming down the track. But I think there's more that I agree with than I disagree with, and in the context of being constructive with regard to this, I would agree with Deputy Casey. I think the membership should be for elected members. And that's something I would feel very strongly on. I have no issue at all with a consultative committee. I think that's useful. I've been involved in consultative committees here in the Dáil with, and in local authorities before, of interested groups of people who are, and not from elite or exclusive communities, from the whole community. So, that's what I'm interested in, and I think all of us are. So the proportionality piece does need to be dealt with. I think how members are selected, we need to get under the bonnet on this a little bit more. I'm happy to engage with you from Tuesday. We've already been working through this bill since yesterday with my colleagues in the party to put forward what changes we would like to see. I do think there, as I said yesterday, that there are some issues with it. But look, I will assent to letting it go to the next stage to report, but I will reserve the right that following our discussions, if I'm not happy that issues have been addressed, we'll vote to remove these particular sections at report stage by way of amendment.
Thanks, Darragh. Fergus?
I apologise, Chairperson, for being late, and thank you for taking me. And I didn't hear a lot of what happened, but I don't find myself out of sympathy with what I've heard so far. If I can just have a few questions here. If you take to Drogheda experience, to Drogheda East Meath experience, the controversy arose there, as I said yesterday, between the two statutory authorities have an agreed plan, but it didn't have statutory powers, and the local district council, for want of a better word, overriding that. And what actually happened then was that green belts were no longer green belts. Areas that were not zoned for housing were. X had land zoned by the county council plan, and then it turned out that Y was the beneficiary in terms of the zoning. So what you're really talking about here, if you get down to it, is green belt planning, is recreation amenity planning, and it's also zoning. And I think they're the key issues that have to be transparent, accountable, and above board in every respect. Now, I read through the minutes of Meath County Council. I went back years looking at what was going on there, right? And I just say that I've read them. And I know perhaps some people in the department may have read them as well, but The point is that what you're now going to do, if I understand it, and using Drogheda as a model, Drogheda Municipal will have 3, Leighton Bellison will have 3. I don't have a difficulty with that. I don't have a difficulty with, I think it's a very good thing that they talk to each other, because people in one area, they have recreation amenities, say the Leighton beaches and all that, and they come into Drogheda for their hospital, their education, or whatever it is. So that's good synergy. The question I have is the county development plan, the zoning issues, the green belt issues, and if as arose before, if the county council development plan view is that the green belt should be from A to B, shall we say, and this committee says the opposite, who is the authority in that? Because I think that's at the heart of this. Yeah.
Thanks, Fergus. I'm sorry, you're finished, Fergus, right?
No.
Oh, sorry.
I'm happy to just a few more points. Yeah. I think one of the key problems was a group of developers understood from meetings with different people, which is well documented, that they would have a zoning for X, and they didn't get it, and that's one of the rows that happened. And what I want, and what everybody wants, is none of that to happen again. Transparency, accountability, direct line of accountability, input from wherever it should come from, but there must be authoritative, definitive, proper planning in terms of green belts and recreation and amenity. I think that's hugely important, because otherwise you might find vast areas of land rezoned for housing with no proper amenities put in place. And if you look at Eastmead, you see an area, a huge number of houses, very few amenities, you know, and that it was done the wrong way. Now they're addressing that now, obviously, and that's just what I'm conscious of what will happen. So in the context of that commentary, if you can come back on those points.
Thanks, Fergus. Owen?
Thanks, Chair. And look, thanks, Minister, for engaging with us constructively on this. I'm of a similar view to Darragh, in the sense that if you're willing to sit down with us on the basis that you've just outlined, I think that's a reasonable proposition and one which we can support. I just want to sound a word of caution, and I'm sure this is going through the officials' heads, even though they're not going to be able to say it officially, that we're setting ourselves, but it's a serious point, which is we're setting ourselves a very, very difficult task, which is within a week to tease through this stuff, consider amendments, have staff draft amendments. I'm agreeing to this, but kind of saying I'm not so sure, even with the best will in the world from everybody, we're going to be able to do this right, and therefore we might have to review it. So I think you're being eminently reasonable. I will say you still haven't answered a range of the questions that are there, but given the fact that we're going to meet about this, and maybe the best way to do it is to do it as an informal working group, to set a couple of hours aside next week so we can tease this out without the formality of an open committee hearing. I think that's the way for us to do it. I would like us to see that meeting next week.
Next Tuesday. I will email all the members.
But Don's idea about an informal, no point doing this setting. I think he's right.
But just visiting out next Tuesday.
But no, your views and mine are identical on this matter. So
but just Chair, just to conclude, I just want to be very, very clear, and I know everybody in the room is very clear, but so nobody outside the room misunderstands. I am not supporting the 4 amendments as they currently stand, and therefore, while I'm not going to object to them today, it's to facilitate that process that you've outlined in recognition of the fact that you're willing to work with us on it.
Last word with you.
Yeah, okay. I'll be brief. Maybe just, and we can probably trash this out later on. I'm still not fully clear at what level this new urban area plan is going to be, and who adopts it, or who adopts it at the end of the day. Like, if it's a local area plan which sits under the county development plan, it only goes for one period of public consultation and then is adopted. It's an environment plan, it's like a county plan. You make the variations and they go back out in public display again. So, and if whatever that process is, if I knew, my mind probably might be slightly at ease. But just, I'm going back to the composition now, and I'm giving myself, if I was just elected to Bray County Council, and I was unfortunately not one of the 3 elected to this new committee, I have no say in how my town develops. So I'm honestly beginning to realise and say here, for this to work, both municipal district members, all of them, should be on this committee. We can adopt county development plans with 50 councillors. There's nothing to stop us adopting this plan with all the complement of the municipal district councillors. Because what's the point in being elected for Bray Council if I end up with having no say on the plan that's going to direct that for the next number of years? Maybe just something you can tease out in your own minds. And as a public representative, if I was a Bray councillor tomorrow morning, wasn't on that committee, the plan that I adopted is superseded by this plan, which I've no input into adopting or amending or anything. I would feel rather left out of the whole process. Yeah.
Members and Minister, in the interest of, I think you've been very fair there to offer an informal briefing next week. And in light of that, rather than reopen it all again, can we press ahead through this section then?
Okay.
Is that agreed?
Sorry, if it's possible.
We used you in your absence, Fergus, as we used your example in your absence, as, and the fact that what was an agreed plan was walked away from by the two local authorities subsequently. I mean, the issue here, you really spelled it out very well. Often the case, the big town is there, the smaller part is on another side of a bridge or whatever, but a lot of the recreational space for the big town is on the other side of the bridge. There's no input, across the boundary. I just want to flag that we will not be in a position to ensure that every councillor in every adjoining district is going to be on it. But I mean, can we? The other thing which
Tuesday then.
Yeah. The one thing I want to say before I finish on it, and it just came to me while members were speaking, we can put in a reference to the fact that the staff who are going to be drawing up these local area plans will come from the two authorities. But principally, to use the Waterford example, most of the staff will be planning officials from Waterford City and County Council. There'll be one or two from Kilkenny. And I think that might be a method of trying to deal with some of the imbalance questions, but the principle of parity at political level, it's not proportionate, but it is essential if we're to avoid the trench warfare that has existed on boundary questions before. But can we put in an amendment that specifies that the staff level follows the population? Because most of us here have been members of local authorities. It's the planning section who draw it up.
Minister, from a staff perspective, sorry, really, we're not concerned. I wouldn't be particularly concerned of that. To follow on from what Deputy Casey said about Deputy O'Brien as well, the amendments as they are, and by letting this through at this stage, I would want anyone to think that that's us supporting those amendments, because we've articulated some very serious concerns and maybe omissions and things we can work on. So, but we will let it go through. But what I won't do as well is to say that from a committee perspective, we'll reserve the right to table amendments should we wish as well. So if what Deputy Casey has said about composition and membership and that, I hope that's something we can work on without closing the door.
Absolutely.
On, there's different ideas there. I think we could work it through on Tuesday. So I just wanted to put on the record that that's our position.
Eugene, you had a quick clarification, did you?
Clarification on Monksland. You know how controversial it was. We will have an opportunity to discuss that, I presume, and what's going to be put in place for there, I presume, will be similar to the other areas.
Once you've raised it here, Eugene, you can raise it at report, and at the informal briefing. So just in the interest of moving along, members, because and the Minister has been fair about a meeting next week, and the members have been very fair about the willingness to press ahead. And in the absence of not reaching agreement, the members can still put amendments down at report stage in relation to this section. Okay. So section 32, amendment 111, in the name of the Minister, new section, that this new section be there inserted. Is that agreed? Agreed?
Agreed.
Section 32, 112, new section, already discussed 111, that this new section be there inserted. Is that agreed? Thank you. Section 32, amendment 113, new section, already discussed, that the question is the new section be inserted. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Section 32, amendment 114, new section, already discussed, that the question is that the new section be there inserted. Is that agreed? Section 32, amendment 115, in the name of the Minister, 115 to 123 inclusive are related, 115 to 122 inclusive are consequential on 123, and 115 to 123 inclusive will be discussed together. Minister, you wish to move?
Yes, I wish to move. Maybe you can let the members speak actually there.
Yeah. Does anybody want to come in here? Sure.
You know how slow we are at the end of the week.
I'm going to have to go into the chamber to move a bill, so I'll come back in, if that's okay. I don't mind the meeting continuing. It's a housing bill that I have to introduce in the chamber, so I'll come back in. Is
Sure,
that okay?
no
But
problem.
people let me know if there's
a vote. Yeah, we'll contact you.
I'll probably be about 20 minutes, okay? And I do want to contribute then. Is that all
No
right?
problem, yeah.
Garamila?
Owen?
So which section are we on, Chair? Sorry, apologies.
115, Amendment 115.
Just let me catch it here. Sorry, Chair.
No, we said to go to members. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think there was very little point in moving amendments if we're going to remove the section. That's why I want to give members the opportunity to speak on the issue.
Sorry, just quick. I think it would be useful, Minister, and not for me to tell you how to do your job, but there's amendments are tabled. Amendments are tabled just for discussions, but you've amendments tabled here. I think the section is something you're introducing. So you've introduced the section in relation to the Department's views and ideas for the future of Galway City and County. So I do think, just to contextualise the debate that will happen from this in the amendments, it would actually be useful for you to put forward. I know I've had discussions with you on this, some very detailed discussions, highlighted some concerns that members of my own party have had about this, and I have to move a housing bill in the House now. I will be watching it, I will be back in, but I think it would be useful for members if you could actually start that and put the context around it. Thank you, and apologies, I will be back in about 20 minutes.
Okay, Chair. The first four amendments, 115 to 118, that I'm proposing to section 32 are drafting amendments to position the reference to Chapter 2 of Part 14 of the Principal Act at the start of the provision. The following four amendments, 119 to 122, are drafting amendments to add a comma and move the reference to section 145 of the 2001 Act and insert the appointment of before the Chief Executive. Final Amendment 123 adds an additional paragraph C to the published section 32 to make a further amendment to Chapter 2 of Part 14 of the 2001 Act by replacing paragraph A of section 1451 to encompass future appointments of Chief Executive of the Galway Local Authority should the need arise for the appointment of a further such Chief Executive subsequent to the first appointment by the Minister under the new section 144A, subsection 4. Basically, if something were to happen, an appointed joint Chief Executive Officer, that another one could be appointed, essentially. Section 32 is seeking to put in place one Chief Executive with responsibility for both local authorities in Galway. It arises out of a government decision which was taken a number of months ago. It will allow for a limited amount of administrative integration. It does not at this stage diminish the legal position of either local authority. The scheduled 2019 local elections will be held by the two existing authorities as currently constituted with two separate plenary councils. The decision to progress preliminary work, which will set out the basis for a future merger, arises from the work of the Independent Galway Local Government Committee, which unanimously recommended the establishment of a new unified Galway authority rather than boundary alteration or retention of the status quo in the local authority areas in Galway. The group concluded that this would maximise the potential of the region to maintain, secure and grow a sustainable economic base into the future, combining the respective strengths of the two existing authorities and its resources, staff and expertise. A subsequent expert advisory group was established in December of 2016 to carry out further detailed examination and planning arising from the 2015 recommendation. The group endorsed and confirmed the recommendation in 2015, the Galway Local Government Review Committee report for amalgamation between the City and County Councils, and stated that this is now all the more urgent in order to capitalise on the funding opportunities under the National Planning Framework and the Capital Programme, and to have capacity to engage in activities such as capital development funded by borrowings. The group was unanimous in its view that amalgamation is required to drive the development of Galway in the context of its regional, national and international remit. Other key specific recommendations include the caveat that any amalgamation must be preceded by addressing noted deficiencies in both human and financial resources, and a need to strengthen the structure of the municipal districts so that their full potential is explored and resourced. Work is underway on this issue in a specific way for Galway, and I've met on a couple of occasions with the Galway Oireachtas members, and I thank them for it. And in a general way, via the report on municipal governance, districts, towns and local electoral areas, which is with the Joint Committee at the moment. A full debate on the proposed merger will be possible when the merger legislation is brought before the Houses of the Oireachtas, which will be next year in 2019.
Thank you, Minister. Owen?
Chair, thank you very much, and thanks to the Minister. So look, I mean, I've taken the view, both with the Cork and the Galway elements of this bill, that I defer to my party colleagues in those constituencies. As you know, Donegal Era kind of led for us on the Cork end of it. But I've been speaking at length to my colleagues in Galway City and County Council, and they're very concerned. And I just want to relay those concerns to you and let you know where we stand. So I'm being given the impression, first of all, that there isn't a great level of enthusiasm or even public engagement in Galway City or County with the merger proposition. So unlike Cork, where there was a very lively and at times very heated exchange, which led to the kind of majority view that has since emerged in the legislation, I'm being given the impression that that's not the case in the first instance in Galway. So notwithstanding the very strong recommendations of the expert group, the public engagement has been limited. It's also clearly obvious that there isn't the same level of political majority support for the proposition as was eventually hammered out in Cork. And I appreciate these things are complicated, they're very, very difficult. But for example, nobody came in here, bar one deputy, to express any fundamental objection to the Cork elements of this bill. People had concerns in terms of the detail, etc. And I've met delegations of city and county councillors from Cork as they met all of the housing spokespeople, and I have a sense of where they were at. So clearly the situation in Galway isn't at the same stage, right? And I just want to put that on record. And I suppose one of my questions is, given all of that, why is it that we have in a bill that is essentially about Cork one element of the Galway merger, when there's going to be another bill about Galway later, early next year, and where it would have surely been better, post reaching at least some degree of majority view of the elected members of those constituencies, to have it all in the one bill? I don't understand the timing and the sequencing of it in this way. The second thing is, as you said yourself, the issues of finances are central, and the Galway members here will speak at much greater length and knowledge about that than I will. But if the finances are so crucial, and if the finances haven't been resolved, that even adds further to the point as to why should we be pressing ahead with the Galway bit now. You know, as somebody who's neutral on this, it's up to the good people of Galway to decide, in my view, how these things should run. I just don't understand it. And unless you give me very, very good answers to those questions, I'm left in the position of saying, well, look, I just think this needs to be taken out of this bill at this stage. That doesn't mean I'm opposed to the merger or in favour of the merger or opposed to the proposition, but that it would be better to deal with it in a comprehensive bill, because otherwise, Minister, it gives the impression that, notwithstanding public disinterest, and the Galway deputies can correct me if I'm wrong in that, and political concern and opposition, that we're pressing ahead with this anyway. And certainly as a deputy from outside of the city and county of Galway who doesn't know the detail, that's not something I could support at this stage.
Thanks, Owen. Eamon?
Minister, I think that this proposal is previous. And what guides me in the first place is the report published by the expert group. And the report itself and the letter accompanying it and the press release issued by the expert group were absolutely clear that prior to any decision, the underlying money issue, not money for merger, but underlying money issue, particularly in Galway County Council, but also in Galway City Council, should be addressed. It says, for example, in the covering letter, is well recognised by the expert advisory group and local government arrangements in Galway that the funding available to the two local authorities in Galway was inadequate. In the press release, they said, the recommended amalgamation must be preceded by addressing noted deficiency in both human and financial resources noted by the group. The report itself says, the group notes the significant revenue underfunding of the Galway local authorities relative to comparators, in addition to staffing constraints in key areas, on the basis that the existing resources available to both organisations are not commensurate with realising the vision of an effective amalgamated authority. The expert advisory group recommends that the existing deficiencies in respect of both human and financial resources be expeditiously resolved as an essential prerequisite to amalgamation process. So what I keep saying again and again and again is, sort the money first, the underlying money. Now, we've had discussions, but the discussions totally related to a small amount of money that was to be given as part of the merger process that we'd have got anyway, even if we were well funded. It had nothing to do with dealing with the underlying financial issue that your own experts that were appointed by the department put as a prerequisite and a prelude. Now, the second issue that I think is of concern is this. This seems like a preemptive move to decide merger is the way forward. And again, I think we need to look at what happened in Cork. The recommendation, I understand, in Cork was for merger. But when it was looked at in a much wider context and a small expert group would look at the thing, and when all the implications were taken into account, then it was decided that there wouldn't be a merger, there'd be a boundary extension. Now, we have submitted a document where we list out, I won't list them all out here, where we list out the unknowns that we need answers to before we could consider this matter further. Obviously, the first unknown is we need to have the money on the table. But then after that, there's a whole lot of other questions we need clarification on. And then I think it would be fair to say that we can go to the public and say to the public and all the interests in the public from Inishbofin all the way over to Ballinasloe and from Crushing on the Galway-Clare border up north to Dunmore and up north to where I live myself, and to Glinsk and to all these areas that are miles and miles away, and then make an informed decision. And these are very, very practical issues because policy cannot be decided without going through in detail the outworking of how this might work. So, Minister, I think what I would be suggesting is that you would withdraw this section, that you would set up some way to interact with the elected members for Galway, that's the Oireachtas members, but also, of course, the local authority members of both the city and the council, to deal with all these issues so that we all come to an informed decision as to what is best, not only for Galway City, which is hugely important, but also for all the people living on the offshore islands, right across the county, to the plains of East Galway, where they produce the food that we eat. So we need to have this debate first. It seems to me that you're putting the cart before the horse. I think we need to take the horse around from the back of the cart and to hitch it to the front of the cart.
Thanks, Eamon. Catherine?
Thanks very much, Chair. Minister, you're probably tired listening to me, and I'm not going to change my my approach. And my approach is based on the fact that I've read all three reports. It's based on my experience as a city councillor for 17 years, and it's based on my knowledge that bigger is not better. Okay. So I think you're taking one aspect of the report, which is the proposed amalgamation or the recommendation, and you're ignoring all of the others that have been outlined by Deputy O'Queeve. And clearly, if you read them, I don't want to take up too much of time for the committee, but it's clearly set out underfunded, under-resourced, not enough staff. Notwithstanding all of that, there's a very generous acknowledgement that on the ground both local authorities work very well together and they share resources. And so nowhere in this documentation does it jump out that the greatest challenge is the fact that we have two local authorities. What jumps out is lack of staff, lack of money, serious problems in relation to housing, transport and so on. They are not the result of two local authorities. They are the direct result of the failure on the part of local authorities on one level, but a bigger failure on the part of the government to ensure that we had housing, providing funding for housing and providing sustainable transport. So they're the important issues in Galway, not a diversion in relation to a proposed amalgamation. The report itself is not internally consistent. It talks about the serious lack of staff, and then it talks about the same staff being united, being an enviable resource to any organisation. It talks about a condition precedent, which has been clearly articulated by Deputy O'Queeve. We need the money and the staff. That's the biggest challenge in Galway, not amalgamation. That hasn't happened. I don't like it being put, give us the money first. I'd like a recognition that your own expert group has said there's a lack of resources and a lack of staff that must be dealt with first. They also talk about increasing the range of services provided by the local authorities. You haven't mentioned any of those. And as it happens, I've just come from the public accounts. And over we see amalgamations lead to huge problems without proper planning. And we see and we pick up the piece, or rather should I say, we articulate what the taxpayer picks up after the event. So the ETB minister is the latest example of that. And the ETBs today, in their accounts, have highlighted that they don't have enough resources for the internal audit. Can you imagine that? They highlight that the computers and the IT is not suitable. This is 5 years, I think. When was the amalgamation? 13? Somebody might correct me, of the ETVs, the old VECs. It's a mess. We have met them locally, they've confirmed that to us, and it is no reflection on the staff. They are struggling with a merger that went through without any planning whatsoever, without any anticipation of what was going to happen. And 5 years later, on the public accounts, we're seeing the direct effects of that, which is costing an awful lot of money to the taxpayer with what happens. So, finally, in relation to the county and the city, it's something I didn't dwell on in the Dáil in my speech, so I just want to mention it again. And again, Deputy O'Queeve has mentioned it. We cover an area, and I worked in Bandlasloe, which is outside my area, but I worked there for many years in a different capacity. So I'm very familiar with it and the hinterland. We go from the Aran Islands down to Portumna. The Aran Islands, which are Irish-speaking, to Inishboffin further north, which is English-speaking. And we go right across Bandlasloe, Portumna, Haskra, and all of this. It is, well, I say what the word? The truthful I don't like is a very strong word, but I think it's totally wrong to say we need a city to drive the development of the county. I think that is a false concept, and it is not based in reality whatsoever. And it disturbs me, one of the quotes in this report on page 41 of the initial report, report in November 15. From the outset, the committee noticed a distinct lack of vision, planning and resource allocation by key stakeholders in regard to the need to revitalise towns throughout the county. Now, I have no idea where they got that. And certainly my colleague Eoin Ó Broin has repeatedly talked, Deputy Grealish has repeatedly talked, and I, who am primarily city-based but also Connemara, have repeatedly talked about the rural areas dying on their feet for lack of investment. Bandlasloe is on a railway station and a harbour, and it's going under. It makes no sense that it should be going under on a railway station, and it could be a feeder for Galway with sustainable transport. And for its own area, and yet it's going under. Now, it's going under, and your plan will make that worse. Now, even if I'm wrong on all of this, I see no reason why you would do it now. There is no bona fides in what you're doing now. If there was bona fides, you'd leave this till next year, bring a proper bill with all of the elements in it that we can discuss and look at and go back. I actually think, and somebody corrected me in the Dáil, maybe I was a bit too high with 98%. Well over 90% of all elected TDs and councillors said no to this. As far as I know, the vast majority engaged in the process. I certainly did. I was horrified that the process was held in a hotel. Horrified. I was horrified at the lack of Irish. And I must say, I wasn't over-impressed with the expertise. But be that as it may, we now have the reports, and you're even ignoring the content of the reports. So I, for one, will be pressing that this is taken out, and that's my amendment.
Noel.
Thank you. Let's go here. Look, Minister, I just want to concur with what my two colleagues have said, Eamon and Catherine. I'd love to be able to come into this committee and come into the Dáil and say I'd support this. This is right for Galway. This is the future for Galway. But it's not, Minister. It's ill thought out. It's been rushed. Proper debate, proper discussion is not taking place regarding this. And Minister, you have to listen to the politicians in Galway. You have to listen to the politicians. We're Oireachtas members, we're elected by the people, we're on the ground, we hear what's happening on the ground. There's 57 councillors and I think only 3 support this merger. And I would ask, Minister, that you would come to Galway County Council, that you would sit in the chamber with them, and you come to Galway City Council, and you sit in the chamber, and I want you to give a commitment here that you will do that, and you will listen to the councillors, because they should have a say in this also. And I firmly believe, Minister, that Galway County Council is being deliberately starved of funds by your department to force them in to try and agree to a merger. I'm not going to go through what I said in the Dáil chamber when this debate came over. And my colleague Eamon, in all fairness, said recently that if we were to bring Galway up to the proper level with Mayo or Kilkenny or any other local authority in this country, we'd be up and we should be getting an extra €70 million. An extra 70, that's only to bring us with par with other local authorities. Galway is at the bottom of the list of the local property tax, and I'm being told we're going to come up the list in the review. But I don't want to be told that we're going to be number 5 in the review of the property tax. I want to know exactly what the funding is going to be in place, because I do not want to support and vote for a bill in Dáil Éireann that I'm going to regret in 4 or 5 years' time when I see what such a disaster that it could be without proper planning, proper debate, proper discussion. And that includes the elected representatives in Galway also, Minister. And I want to know exactly, to the penny, what funding is going to be put in situ if this is going to happen without our support, which I think would be wrong and very wrong, Minister, to railroad this through without the political support of both the vast majority of the Oireachtas members and also the county councillors. And if you want this to work, and if you want to merge both city and county and to have 2 local authorities, 2 chambers coming together that need to work for the betterment of Galway city and county, will you need them supporting this, not against it, Minister? So I'll support my colleague Catherine and Eamon in the amendment that we in honour of God withdraw this from this bill, all reference to Galway from this bill. Let the Cork bill go through. Let that be. There is support for the Cork bill in the chamber, and Eoin Ó Broin, in all fairness to him, and I want to compliment him and thank him for listening to us. He's actually listened to us, and he's listened to our concerns, and he came in here with an open mind. He hasn't given commitment what he's doing, but he did say that he'll listen to the debate and he'll make his decision on that. I'd ask that you just take Galway out of it. Let us have a full and proper debate. Don't go appointing a chief executive, because once that chief executive is appointed for both city and county, That's the train gone out of the station, heading down the railway line, and we ain't going to be able to stop it. So, Minister, I'll conclude on this, and I'll support Eamon, and I'll support Catherine, and I'll support all the councillors in Galway that are of the same view, and I haven't heard Anne's contribution yet, but I'm hoping she'll be in support of us. And Michael Fitzmaurice, who I know has great reservations about this as well.
Okay.
And Eugene, finally, take it out, bring us in, let us bring in a whole new bill in the new year to deal with the appointment of a new chief executive, to deal with the funding, to deal with the merger, and to deal with the issues that goes from one end of the county to the other. That's all I'll ask, Minister, and I'll ask that all the Oireachtas members support us on this.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for your time this afternoon. I suppose I'm going to be no different, and I'm going to be short and brief. I haven't taken up time in the Chamber and I haven't spoken on it, but I did attend all the consultations that were held in Galway on it. I'm disappointed that we're not going to have our own. I don't like to come under the shadow of anybody, Minister, and I certainly don't like to come under the shadow of Cork. I'd like our own entity. I'd like us to be out on our own. I'd like to have a proper debate and a proper discussion. I think we owe it to the citizens of Galway, we owe it to our elected representatives, the councillors down there, and we owe it to the Oireachtas members. So having us slapped in, under, included with, is not good enough for the people of Galway, and I refute the idea that this would happen. What else am I going to say? I think Noel Grealish, our Deputy Grealish, is after saying it correct. Starved is the word we would use, what has happened to Galway. Starved of funding for years. It's going on since 1996. We were very fortunate, I think earlier this year we met with departmental officials, and they were wonderful, and they explained it to us, the breakdown as to where it went wrong. And I think it was 530 separate accounts all rolled into a number of accounts, and everything got pulled in together. But see, the trouble was when that happened, we saw Mayo take a lead ahead of us, and we get left behind and left behind and left behind. And when you look at what we as a key driver in Galway, and you looked at what was happening below in Mayo, the only thing that was difference between Galway and Mayo was the Taoiseach. And let's call a spade here, and that's when we started to dishevel with funding, and I'm not afraid to say it. Underfunded, under-resourced and not enough staff. That is what keeps jumping out in the report. And if we're to take the people and give them Professor Eoin O'Sullivan his chance, he did a very comprehensive report. And Noel is right. He has never heard me say whether I'm pro or against the merger. And I still won't say. But I will say, first thing, we need to get our ducks in a row. We need to fund the council and put a proper strategy in place. I live in a place of Groden Portumna. When they started drawing up this merger the first day ever, I said, lads, would you put me in with North Tipperary? Because, you know, I'd be far better off. Galway is made up of 3 counties in one. You have the east, the west and the city. And what you're trying to do at the moment is, we're poles apart. What Eamon and Catherine talks about is totally different to what I have to experience abroad in Portumna, Garth, Athenry and below in Tuam. We're totally different. Having us all under the one remit scares the living dickens out of the councillors out. The likes of Ivan Canning abroad in Portumna, he reckons no money will ever make it to Portumna. And you know what? He's probably right. But I'm not going to rule that out, Minister. I keep saying it, I have an open mind in the whole concept. I'm not closed and I'm not tunnelled on it. But until I see the funding coming to the councillors, and if we don't start with the money first, I have a serious reservation on it. So I'll double down until I see a commitment for money. My last request again is, take this out of it, give Galway its own entity, give us our own proper debate inside in the chamber, and I want to work with you, not against you. Thank you.
Eugene.
Thank you, Pat. And I'm going to really keep this brief because, apart from being a Rossi, there's no point in repeating everything people have said, but I do represent Roscommon Galway constituency. And look, I agree with all that's been said by Eamon and Catherine and Noel and Anne. The reality is, you know, Galway City and Galway County, fantastic place, fantastic communities, fantastic identity. And I think what has been going on for years is dragging it down. It's dragging down the city, it's dragging down the county. Elected in 2016, and I say within months, the issue of how bad the finances, the funding was brought to my attention by a number of councillors, and I did attend a number of meetings. And we really need to get this right, as the other speakers have said. We need to have proper discussions. I mean, Ballinasloe, less than 40 minutes on a motorway down from Galway City and feel so left out. I mean, we could make this fantastic. You know, there could be so much more done with Ballinasloe. I mean, Galway City bursting at the seams in so many areas, and yet you have these counties, great communities, who want, you know, more in their area, but prepared to work for it and work with the politicians to make it happen. So just to cut to the point, say, I would really like to see, you know, this being put in for a proper discussion, not rushed through at the moment, because I can assure you, if it is rushed through at the moment, it will be a very bad recipe that won't work, and we'll be back in, you know, having problem after problem in the city and county if we get it wrong now. So now is the time to get it right, and give it time and do the right thing.
I'll bring the Minister back in now.
I got my gum shield. Thank you, Cathaoirleach. No, I grind my teeth, so I have to be conscious.
Doing a lot of grinding there, were you?
I have to be conscious of that. I'll try and address the issues that are raised by the members as much as I can. Deputy O'Brien was first, and he expressed the concerns of the Sinn Féin councillors in Galway, and the view that public consultation hadn't been as deep, I think, or that public engagement, and that in Cork, which is a substantive subject of this piece of legislation, that all is kind of peace and harmony. Well, I just want to, I suppose, put the timeline on it in the sense that when we were at the stage where we are now with Galway in Cork, there was no peace or harmony, or there was no one in support. There was no, the city councillors wished to extend the boundary. County councillors were and remain completely of a different view, and the same goes for Oireachtas members. But it has been a process that's gone on over a number of years. I do want to say at the start, there's nothing rushed about this section. This section talks about the appointment of a joint chief executive, and the process in question in Galway has been going on for just about 4 years now. So the process hasn't been rushed. I acknowledge and what numerous of the contributors have said in relation to Galway having its own bill. Absolutely, Galway should and Galway will have its own bill in the new year. The 2019 local government bill will be a reverse of this. It will be principally about Galway, and there will be other local government matters, including perhaps if we don't reach agreement on the urban area committees, that they might be contained within it. Local government bills tend to be like that. The reason why we're having, or why this section is included, is that in the areas where mergers have happened, in Waterford, in Limerick and in Tipperary, the very first thing that happened was the appointment of a joint chief executive. I point out that in Galway until the mid-1980s there was one one county manager, city manager for the two positions. It's still the case in some local authorities that there's people who were covering two different areas. So in and of itself, having a joint manager isn't a merger, but it is a kind of road. It's a stepping stone on the road towards a merger. I'm not going to deny that, but I just want to return maybe to the chronological order that questions were asked. Deputy O'Queeve spoke about prior to merger that the financial resources must be resolved. I'm not resiling from it at all. We need to resolve them prior to merger. And I will go into some detail now about extra resources, which you're right, a lot of it would have been provided in the event of merger anyway. But following on from the meetings that have taken place with the Galway Oireachtas members and with spokespeople, the two O'Briens, the two deputies O'Brien, I should say. Is that Byrne? Is Byrne?
O'Brien. O'Brien.
I'm not as touchy as my namesake.
But
it's not.
No, just to reiterate that there will be additional funding built in for the county council, which is the 4th or 5th most underfunded council in the country historically. And right from the start, 18 months ago, when I was appointed to this position, Galway councillors were lobbying me. I don't accept for a minute that I haven't engaged. I haven't gone to Galway, and I will say this to you, Deputy Grealish. Well in advance of the Galway bill, I will go to city and county and sit in and discuss and have a full exchange with, and I think that's the right thing to do. It didn't happen, as my understanding, in the other mergers, but it's actually the right thing to do, and I have no problem doing it. But I've had plenty of engagement with the Oireachtas members and with councillors in both formal and informal positions over the last 18 months. I will not be withdrawing the section. Because what we're dealing with here isn't the Galway merger per se. It is a stepping stone on the road to it, and I'm not denying it or seeking to move away from it. And I absolutely agree that finance has to be resolved and a roadmap towards permanent resolution has to be in place before the real nitty-gritty of a merger can happen. I was struck also by your comments, Deputy Grealish, that I wasn't in this position or in any position other than your own now when the mergers happened in other councils. But there is absolutely no necessity for the two councils, the two chambers, to merge at all. I'm familiar with one of the boroughs in London, Richmond and South London.
That's a chronology.
How do you make a legal decision?
No, I'm saying in advance of the, no, I'm just outlining, that's a matter for the Galway bill. But you can merge the management structure, but you don't have to have just one council. That is what was done.
How do you agree the budget then?
You have two separate budgets. There'll be two parts to it.
Then why go ahead with the merger then?
Well, I'm saying that that's one of the options, Deputy. And I mean, I'm not trying to open it up to too much to and fro, but if I was doing the mergers back when they happened a number of years ago, I think that there would have been a certain logic to having, particularly because of the historic factor, and you have raised this with me before about the position of Mayor of Galway City, and I believe that we can accommodate that, notwithstanding the fact that we're going to have a plebiscite for a directly elected head of the local authority. But there's a civic function for the city mayor, and I will be, when the bill comes into place, we'll be, I hope, in a position to fully incorporate that. Deputy Connolly spoke. I don't think I put myself right the other evening. I come from a part of County Kilkenny, albeit I live in a city now and have done for 6 or 7 years, but there isn't any part of the wildest part of West Galway that has a more sparsely populated area than where I come from. There's 20,000 acres of state forestry right at the back of my home. It's a really rural place, despite being in Kilkenny and everything is on the east coast. People think is lovely, and there's huge populations. There's parts of every county. And you're right, rural areas don't need cities to survive or to develop into the future. And that wasn't the point that I was trying to make yesterday. The point that I was trying to make is that when the local government structure was established by the 1898 Local Government Act, the interdependence between Ballinasloe and the city and out to Clifton, like there'd be some people who'd never, maybe they were from Clifton, they were never in Ballinasloe. You know, that was just the Ireland of 120 years ago. It's a fact, notwithstanding the fact that they were in the one county. Now, the world of business and of politics has changed, and that interaction, that decimation that has affected those towns like Ballinasloe, and I'm very familiar with it, is influenced. It's influenced. Like part of the influence is the change in people's behaviour in terms of retail and shopping and employment. And as jobs have moved and people's purchasing has moved out of the town of Ballinasloe, that's had that effect all over the country. But that doesn't mean that we can't have new strategies or development plans for the rejuvenation of towns like Ballinasloe. And it has happened in other parts. The deadest town in my county, in my life, was Castlecomer. Coal mines closed in the 60s. There was the late Jim Gibbons delivered mills for textile manufacture. They closed about 20 years ago. Nothing in the place. Through a combination of the local authority, private enterprise and a few local leaders, the town of Castlecomer has been completely transformed. The biggest visitor centre that's not a historic monument in the southeast is the Discovery Park in Castlecomer on the edge of the town. The physical appearance of the town has been greatly improved by grants from what would have been Eamon O'Keefe's department in the past, that rural and community affairs, and now where Michael Ring is. I'm saying that we can't freeze those towns in aspic and think that what worked in the past will work in the future. That this is about trying to understand that the
Disingenuous, Minister. Sorry.
A number of people have indicated to come back in.
I think you're being a little bit disingenuous.
Minister, do you mind if I just let, because we're pressed on time now.
You can't let that pass.
Darragh,
we don't
do you
need
want
a
to come
big
in there?
local authority.
Sorry, Catherine. Sorry, Catherine.
Okay.
Sorry, we always abide by the order in here. Darragh.
Yeah, look, I'll be brief on this, Minister. I've had some detailed discussions on this, and you'll see from my colleagues in Galway here that there are genuine concerns, particularly around finance, funding, and the historical issues there are well known. You know, I would say though that Galway deserves full and proper debate, and I believe that the time for that we will have a separate bill on any future merger, and my party reserves their position on that until that bill is published. But I would ask you to engage more directly and intensively with the members, our TDs from Galway, of all parties and of none, in relation to the specific concerns they have, particularly around funding. And I think that is fundamentally the issue. I think there are synergies to be gained. As I said, we'll wait to see the bill itself with regard to the merger. But I think at this stage, what we're talking about is the chief executive function, effectively there being one chief executive. We're not discussing the merger of Galway, and when we do, we will certainly be looking at that in great detail. I have come to you in relation to the funding, as you know. You've given some additional funds and some commitments there, and I would ask you to engage with the other members of here, and I will continue to engage on behalf of Fianna Fáil with you to make sure that Galway gets more than gets its fair share and gets redress on this.
Sarah. Owen.
Thanks, Chair. Look, thanks to the Minister for the response. You're probably not surprised it doesn't satisfy my particular concerns, so I'll certainly be formally opposing this section. I just want to say we only have 20 minutes left and we want to get through all of this bill. So it's not that I want to stop anybody from having their discussion, but I'd prefer us to actually move into the formal votes if we could do that. And to folks who aren't members of the committee, we are really keen to get this bill finished today. So I'll certainly be calling a roll call vote in opposition to this section of the bill. But I'd ask the members of Galway, whom I know this is very, very important to allow the committee to get through the other business we want to, because we have to give up the room in 20 minutes.
So, Anne, do you want to come in quickly? Thank you.
To work with.
Pat, the same. Noel?
Just very briefly, small little point. We haven't heard what the commitment is going to be in funding. Galway County Council, Minister, you're aware, deferred their budget meeting until next Tuesday or Monday to see what the outcome of this would be. We've heard nothing from you regarding funding. We're going to be going back to Galway this afternoon with nothing for them. So, I'll just finish on this point, Cahir. Look, I'm interested in what you said is going back to the status quo which was there in the 80s. You had one manager, two chambers. I'd be interested in sitting down and talking to you about that. Great. That's what was there before. I'm open-minded to that. I'm not saying I'll agree with it, but I still think we should have a separate bill and withdraw this.
Great. Thanks, Noel. Eamon?
You talked about a process. Now, the second interim report was issued on the 26th of April 2018. And after it was issued, we as public representatives were invited to a briefing, not a consultation on this, and told this is it. You have no input. Number two, it gives the game away in one important national aspect. They talk about bringing the industrial agencies together for a consultation, but extraordinarily, Oireachtas na Gaeltacht wasn't even mentioned. So it shows you the mindset is. The rest is what they call hinterland.
Eamon, could I ask for your forbearance here, that if we proceed to a vote, that we can continue this conversation after the meeting, but that we could proceed, because otherwise we can't actually get the votes in.
One question then to the Minister. Minister, I understand you got a document that has 2 points, but the second point is A, B, C, D, F, G, H, I.
I was told I was going to get it, but I haven't got it.
Well, I'll check, because
Can I have what you have then?
No problem. No.
Okay. So, sorry, members, what's going on? Okay, Minister, Eamon, if you could, it would be really great if you could facilitate this, because we're now nearly the best part of 10 hours of this. We really need to just press ahead with this vote, and I have no problem allowing the discussion to continue on after the meeting.
But maybe we could avoid the vote.
Well, if the members of the committee have asked, can we move ahead with a vote? So I have to respect the request of the members of the committee. So, Minister, you wish to move Amendment 115 under Section 32?
Yes, I move.
Okay. So the question is, Section 32, Amendment 115. The question is that amendment be made. Is that agreed? No. So, on that amendment, number 115, the question is that amendment be made. Those in favour say tá. Those against say níl. Okay, the question is carried. Okay, okay, right. Okay, so Section 32, Amendment 116, already discussed 115. Question is that amendment be made. Is that agreed? Not agreed. Okay. So on Amendment 116, the question is that amendment be made. Those in favour say tá. Tá. Those against say níl.
Níl.
Níl. The question is carried. Section 32, Amendment 117, already discussed 115. Question is that amendment be made. Is that agreed?
Not agreed.
Not agreed. So the question is on Amendment 117, the amendment be made. Those in favour say tá. Tá. Those against say níl.
Níl.
The question is carried. Section 32, Amendment 118, already discussed. The question is that amendment be made. Is that agreed?
Not agreed.
No. On Amendment 118, the question is the amendment be made. Those in favour say tá. Those against say níl.
Níl.
The question is carried. Section 32, Amendment 119, already discussed. The question is that amendment be made. Those in favour say tá. Those against say níl.
Níl.
The question is carried. Section 32, Amendment 120, already discussed. Question is that Amendment 120 be made. Those in favour say tá. Those against say níl.
Níl.
Question is carried. Section 32, Amendment 121, already discussed. Question is that amendment be made. Those in favour say tá. Those against say níl.
Níl.
The question is carried. Section 32, Amendment 122, already discussed. Question is that Amendment 122 be made. Those in favour say tá. Tá. Those against say níl.
Níl.
Question is carried. Section 32, Amendment 123, in the name of the Minister, already discussed. The question is that Amendment 123 be made. Those in favour say tá. Those against say níl.
Níl.
The question is carried. So the question is that Section 32, as amended, stand part of the bill.
Not agreed.
Sure.
I want to highlight that two technical, actual, grammatical amendments will be needed to be made in report stage. I want to bring it to the attention of the committee for clarity to avoid potential conflict. Subsection 4 of Section 3, dealing with regulations, should be subject to the section that enables plebiscite regulations to be made, which was passed by the committee last night as Amendment 106. I'd like to bring forward an amendment to that effect at report stage, and also like to mention that I would bring forward an amendment at report stage to subsection 7 of the new section dealing with the annual contribution by City Council to County Council, inserted by Amendment 71 within its relation to Cork, which is a drafting amendment to change the last word in the provision from section to subsection.
Thank you, Minister. Is that agreed? So the question is that Section 32, as amended, stand part of the bill. Those in favour say tá.
Tá.
Those against say níl.
Níl.
Thanks. So question is carried.
No tá.
Thank you. The door should be locked and the division will now be taken. On the question that Section 32, as amended, stand part of the bill, a division has been challenged. So pursuant to standing orders, the division will now be taken by the Clerk to the committee. So 4 in favour, 1 against. That's carried. So we now move on to new section 124 in the name of the Minister. Minister, you wish to press?
Yes, I move.
Okay, so the question is that new section 124 in the name of the Minister, that the new section be there inserted. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Amendment 125 in the new section. The question, Minister, you wish to press?
Yes.
The question is that the new section be there inserted. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Schedule 126 is out of order in the name of Mattie McGrath, Michael Collins. So the question is that schedule be a schedule to the bill. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. We now move on to title. Amendment 127 in the name of the Minister. 127 and 128 are related. Minister, do you wish to press?
Yes.
So the question is that Amendment 127, that amendment be made. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
128 in the name of the Minister. The question is that amendment be made. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. So that this be the title to the bill, an act to provide for the transfer of part of the administrative area of the Council of the County of Cork to the administrative area of the Council of the City of Cork, to provide for the holding of plebiscites by certain local authorities on the question as to whether or not the Cathaoirleach or those local authorities should be elected to such positions by electors of the administrative areas of local authorities, and the question as to whether or not certain functions of chief executives of local authorities should be transferred to those Cathaoirleachs, to provide for the making of local area plans under the Planning and Development Act 2000 in relation to certain urban areas by committees appointed for that purpose, to provide for the abolition of the positions of Chief Executives of the Council of the City of Galway and Chief Executive of the Council of County of Galway, and the establishment of the position of Chief Executive of both of those councils. For those and other purposes, to amend the Local Government Act 1991, the Local Government Act 2001, the Valuation Act 2001, the Official Languages Act 2003 and certain other enactments, and to provide for matters connected therewith. Is that agreed? Sorry? No problem. Twice?
Agreed.
That's agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you, So, in accordance with Standing Orders number 90, the following message will be sent to the Clerk of the Dáil. The Select Committee on Housing, Planning and Local Government has completed its consideration of the Local Government Bill 2018 and amendments thereto. Can I thank the Minister, their officials and all in attendance today, all the members, and especially for being so amenable and flexible to proceed. Darragh, you want to...
I want to say something just very, very briefly, Minister, to take back to the department, that you'll see from the discussions that I think all members have been constructive, responsible and reasonable in our approach. And I would ask you to when you're talking to your colleagues, and specifically the Minister for Housing, that he may look at some of opposition legislation that has been passed at second stage that may be as cooperative, reasonable and responsible as the opposition has been in trying to advance other legislation that we have, because we're counting up the credits on one side and they're not going up at the other. But I welcome your engagement here today and the openness in which you and your officials have dealt with us today, and I think that's a good thing, but it's not being reciprocated enough, should I say. Thank you.
Okay, members, thank you very much. This meeting is now adjourned. Next meeting, Select Committee, will be on Tuesday, the 11th of December at 6:30 for the estimates. Thank you all very much.